Behold, my glorious supporter, EyePatchNotes, has requested a discussion on the concepts of limbs and joints in Buildcraft. Oh, we're doing this again. Oh, wait. No. Okay, wait, hold on. Satisfying Buildcraft asks for informed decision making. Okay, rarely is there a single best or correct answer. Okay, I can feel the waves of therapeutic logic washing over me. The player can choose which leg, or legs the build, okay, can stand on. However, some builds can cross the border from Sleipnir to Shoggoth. Okay, the Lovecraftian reference is not appreciated. But may you request a discussion on the concepts of limbs and joints in Buildcraft? If you absolutely must call them those things, yes. However, for the rest of this video, I'm not going to call them those things unless I slip up because I've been talking too much about limbs because of all your weird parlays about limbs. Not you, EyePatchNotes, but collectively everyone's. So I'm going to call them trees and branches. Trees are, after all, the sort of colloquial name for talent trees in video games of yore, such as World of Warcraft and all of the other games. So I'm going to call them trees, and then the joints are going to be branches. So, as usual, EyePatchNotes has some examples. I always like this part, so we'll read through them. But just to quickly summarize before we go, the idea of limbs and branches. So this is the idea that for a given character, there wouldn't be a single best or correct answer because the game has offered you multiple trees to choose from. And so if one of them was just the best, why would there be multiple trees? I want to talk about that part a little bit before we go on. A lot of players have this mindset where they think the game is like something to be solved, or maybe they don't think this, but to them, what feels better is to put the game in a way where it can be simplified down to, I don't have to feel torn about these two decisions. It can just be this one. I can just take this one. And I know I've done the mental legwork for myself that I don't care about this other option. Personally, I think if this is possible in a game, the game has somewhat failed. And what you really want to do in game design, and what good games do in their game design, is to set the game up in such a way that the options are different enough that you won't feel torn as long as you know what you want. And if you want everything, like me, then that's the situation where you feel like, oh, I don't know which one to pick, right? You might choose based on a variety of systems. You might choose based on uniqueness. Which one is the least similar to what I have? Which one is the most unique to this character? You might choose based on what you need. Don't care how unique it is in general, but at the moment, I don't have this, so I need this. An example of this, for example, might be in the game overall, there are many fast weapons or speedy characters, but you don't have any of them for one reason or another. Maybe you had to choose to not have them, or maybe you just don't have them yet, or maybe you don't like them for some reason. So you're picking to make this character, that's normally a medium speed character, really fast, not because it particularly plays to their strengths or not, but because you do not have a character that is doing that. And so relative to the characters or weapons you have, this making this medium speed character faster is more of a marginal benefit for your account overall, or something like that. I think, to conclude this little intro part, that the better way that games generally develop themselves, if they have good, interesting Buildcraft choices, is that the choices are different enough that provided you want one thing, you have an identity for that character, you will just pick this tree and it's fine. And so the people who feel frustrated or conflicted about the choices, they don't have to worry about that. But the people that are interested in the choices, at the same time, they're different enough that they feel like, oh, I can just do the thing. And by making them balanced with each other, this is this critical thing that people don't seem to understand about balance in PvE games. Balance still matters in these games because you cannot allow the player to have an easy choice if they know what they want, or interesting choices if they would like anything and they're just trying to decide because they find that fun, unless the choices are both good, unless all the choices are good, because otherwise you feel shoehorned. Maybe you are serving a player that knows they just want damage. They just want the big damage. They don't care about hitting multiple enemies. They don't care about going faster, firing faster, whatever. They just want big damage. I'm kind of combining talking about Pyre and Warframe. I don't know. So they know they want the damage one. Then they see two trees, either two different ways to build or two literal talent trees or whatever. It can be in any game. And they see that one of them is clearly focused on damage. It's not very hard to do this part. You can clearly make one damagey and then one, utility E, or shoring up the weaknesses. We had a previous parlay about maximizing benefits or minimizing detriments. And a lot of the time you'll see two trees that are like that, maximizing benefits, minimizing detriments. This character is already good at this, make them better, or this character isn't as good at these other things, which would support this other thing they're good at, make them better at those things. And then you can pick. Let's say you're a game developer, you made a game, and now you're spying on a player. This player, they just want damage. They know they just want damage. They view the thing as being good at damage. They just want damage. You have done a good job of making the two trees defined. So it's easy for them to say, I just want damage. I'll just pick the damage one. But they're not balanced. The tree that gives you more damage doesn't give you much damage. And the player looking at the tree knows that. And they think, well, that's not much more damage. And so then suddenly the decision is difficult for them again. And you've messed it up for the person that wants the different choices, because to me, I look at the tree and say, okay, well, I'm not married to either option. What do they both do? Okay, this one shores up some of the weaknesses, gives me some mobility or whatever. And this one gives me more damage, but it doesn't give you much. That's not a very good value. So I guess I'll just pick this one. And then I feel bummed out because it feels like it's not a choice. It's like, why is this even here? Why is this option in the game? So that's why balancing is, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but that is one of the reasons why balance is important in a game that is PvE focused. It's better for people who don't want choices and for people who do want choices for opposite but complementary reasons. So when you say rarely is there a single best or correct answer, the player can choose which. You wrote some other words that I'm not going to say there, but I'm going to say trees and branches, the build can stand on. That, I think, what I've just described is the mechanism by which that happens. I hope that makes sense. So let's go on to some examples you gave. Regarding Supergiant, you said. Okay, yeah, I think Supergiant does a pretty consistently good job of this, so that's a great place to begin with examples. Pyre, for example, has about 3, okay, use a word there, trees per character. Position on the pitch when they're playing basketball, talisman, and masteries. And the masteries have 2 trees, literal mastery trees, but we can view that as a tree. And the masteries in particular have a number of, you said a different word, but I'm going to say branches, or ways that the tree can bend, though most trees have at least some flexibility. Right, yeah, so it's basically just how many knobs can you turn on the build. You can map out archetypes when you look at a given character and say, okay, these are the different things we can do. You could have a character that has this mastery tree focus and this position and this talisman, and then just do all the combinations. And for games like Pyre, there are a lot of those combinations, but you could count them all. I don't think you would want to. A lot of the time, the position makes a minor difference. It's not inconsequential. It's interesting as a decision point, but it's hardly a whole tree for a build to stand on. It's more like I would view it more as a branch of the character themselves. You pick 3 different characters and then position on the pitch of those 3 spots on your basketball team. That's more like a branch to choosing 3 characters for your team overall, to the tree that is build crafting your team in the first place. Whereas a lot of games, you said, okay, Hades, on the other hand, has an almost unknowable number of trees and branches. Okay, you're really trying to get me with these. Some other words that I will not say in there, and you know what they are, and we won't talk about that anymore. Has an almost unknowable number of trees and branches with its semi-randomized player progression. Right. So with Hades, there's just so many contingencies, and you can't look at, okay, every build with Zeus attack, it's like, okay, there's thousands of those, it would be impractical to think of it that way. And so we largely don't. We sort of think in terms of general archetypes, this tree and then what adds to it. We kind of view everything else as branches. In a way, EyePatchNotes concludes, certain games have builds that can be immediately grasped, and other games have builds whose true form cannot be comprehended. Yeah, or mostly builds that are one way or the other too. Yeah, I think what's interesting is that when you make a build that has, we talked in a previous parlay about maximizing benefits, minimizing detriments. I think a lot of the time, maximizing benefits gets more complicated because you're trying to make a bunch of things work together, and you have to worry about marginal benefit and diminishing returns if the game has them, and you have to worry about what are even other sources of making the thing do any more damage, depending on the game. And if that's the only thing the thing is good at, then you're also more likely to get walled out by some circumstance. In this circumstance, the one thing you made your thing good at just isn't good, and then what do you do? For example, whereas making more trees and less branches, I guess, but more branches across more trees, but less branches per tree, making a build that is good at a lot of things a little is generally a lot more stable because it means that you're not as vulnerable to all of the problems I just suggested. So for example, in Hades, it's a lot harder to make a build that is good at one thing and only has one attack. It's just got a special boon. And the rest of the build is like 20 boons that all make that special attack better. That is not easy in Hades. It's possible, but it's hard. I mean, that's not usual. It's much easier to make a build that has multiple different, the special, the cast, and then maybe the attack every so often to weave it in, all give you some value, give you some good damage, and you can combine them to get a good amount of damage out, and they'll all work well in different situations. That's a lot easier by comparison, and you're much less likely to go into an Erebus gate and get destroyed because the particular situation in that Erebus gate was counter to the only thing that your build was good at. Fact aside that it's just hard to make that one thing just better and better and better. Generally, focusing on multiple multipliers or multiple sources of damage is easier. Having more trees and less branches on those trees is usually easier than having one big tree with a bunch of branches, which kind of mirrors this general rule that all things being equal, provided the game is designed in a reasonable way with respect to reasonable math, you can safely assume that you should use the multipliers that are in the game. If there's a multiplier in the game, you might as well use it. In Warframe, you kind of don't need to do the math that multi-shot is worth it. You can just look at it and see, okay, this is a multiplier. It multiplies my elemental damage and my base damage. Do I get about the same amount of this multiplier as I do elemental damage and base damage? Yes, it's good. You don't need to check if it's good. That's just basically how math works. It's going to be good. And even if it's not the absolute best or whatever, which it is in Warframe generally, it will be very good. And it would be very, very unusual to have a game where that thing was good, but was not quite the best mathematically. You'd have to do that on purpose, is what I feel like. You would need to design a game purposefully to do that thing, and I don't know why you would do that. It's weird. You would just be flying in the face of common sense for the people that knew it. Now, I understand for some people, and we talk about this a lot in these parlays, it's common sense to, this weapon has good crit, so I'll stack up a bunch of crit. But what I think is interesting is how a lot of games, you wonder just logically, well, this game has these other things. Why would you use them? Why would they be in here if they weren't good? And so if they are good, then don't I want them? And the answer is yes, you do want them. Why else would they be in there? Or why would there even be a build system for a character if in Genshin Impact the character just has a stat, let's say HP, that increases all of their abilities' effectiveness? Well, why can you even pick gear if HP is the best build? Well, because it isn't necessarily. I mean, okay, on some characters it's good. And a lot of the time it is good. A lot of the time that is an intuitive way to do things that is good, but not automatically the best. One thing I love, speaking of Genshin Impact, is that on a lot of characters that do good damage, building attack, attack, attack is actually pretty good. It's just not better than building with respect to the different multipliers available. It's better to use all the multipliers, but it's not bad to just use a bunch of attack. It's much worse, but you can complete the game that way. That's what I'm trying to say. And even in Warframe, it's largely true that the normal star chart you can easily complete without understanding marginal benefits and different multipliers. But then hopefully it gets you thinking, well, if I experiment a little or look up any build ever, you'll see that people are mixing many different sources of damage, which I think is kind of obvious. But the main thing is I think it mirrors this idea that many trees with smaller amounts of branches are generally going to be more balanced or reasonable than a one tree with a ton of different branches or a few trees. Cool. So as usual, EyePatchNotes has included a little spoiler part that I will now click on and uncover. Oh, if it hasn't already come up, I propose pillars as a slightly more serious name instead of trees, or the other word I'm not going to say. Pillars, huh? That other word comes with associations of bending over backwards, okay, that's nightmare fuel, and said Lovecraftian mentions, Sleipnir and Shoggoth. Though images of sturdy architecture feel more romantic. Vocabulary buildcraft ho, as long as it takes us away from body parts bending backwards, I say vocabulary buildcraft ho. Pillars, what a therapeutic word to use for that. Sure, I'm gonna stick with my trees. Pillars is solid. Trees and branches. I came really close to saying body part names there. This is harder than I thought it would be. Yeah, trees and branches. I don't know. I think that the interesting thing for me to say about this topic is that there's this interesting way in which it feels like when I build characters or weapons or whatever in games to be rounded, I often feel vaguely bad. Now, I'm a person who likes to try a lot of different things. And so when I play Genshin Impact, for example, I have every 4-star character in the game. So I've built them with different philosophies based on what I think they're good at. I build characters using things that are good in general, but I think they make more sense here. I've built characters based on I just only like using them for this, so I'm going to build them that way. I've built characters based on everybody else builds them this way, and you get more value from this one thing if you build the character this way, but I just want to build for some other stuff and see what they can do. And I've built characters in the most stereotypical way possible, and lots of combinations of them. And I like all those things because this is what I do for a living. Of course I like all those things. But what's interesting to me is that when I build a character to have a variety of strengths at the cost of some other main strength, I do think to myself, okay, but then it's like you could be getting the most. You could have the most of this thing, within reason. Isn't that appealing in some way? It is appealing in some way because it gives you this feeling that you have maximized the thing and there's nowhere further to go. So I do understand that if you had a more extreme version of that feeling about, I did this all the way there, it's done, I've finished it, this character is complete because they have the most of this thing. They give the most damage increase. You can't get any more damage increase out of this character. They have the most, and I know that. And yes, I've sacrificed a lot of other benefits along the way, whether I recognize it or not, most players. But I have the most of this one thing, I think that gives people some confidence and security that they kind of did a thing right, and it feels good to feel like you made a good decision. I often talk about video games as a sort of therapy for our day-to-day lives, where we think about, we have to keep investing our time in these things and we don't know if they're going to pay off or be worth our time, but we just have to do them on blind faith, and it feels bad sometimes. College, the schooling system in general, working a 9-to-5 job, just doing things that you don't know are going to make you happy eventually, but you just have to hope, basically. And I think video games some video games with their incremental gains and their progression over time, but also with, again, things like making decisions, you want to feel like you made a solid choice. I think that's part of where that comes from. And I kind of get that. I sort of understand. At the same time, what I think is interesting is that logic doesn't apply any less when you think about building a character for the most of something. you neglected all those other things. And so if you build a character for a lot of things, then you neglected the most of something. It's the same. It's the both ways you have the problem, right? You maximized minimizing the detriments. Like you maximized not maximizing. If you're not going to maximize this one thing about the character and you're instead going to make them rounded, you maximized that. But I guess because it's not one thing, it just feels different. To me, this is one of the main hurdles to get over that would convince a lot of people to just make different, interesting builds and have fun with them, or know if they don't have fun with that, which I really want to do. I want people to give that a shot. And if they don't like it, that's fine. But just that I think a lot of people would enjoy that. And the way for them to open the door to maybe enjoying that is to understand that you are maximizing something. It's just overall value rather than, so when you look at a team as a whole in Genshin Impact, I often have a lot of characters who I've built as supportive characters, and I'm trying to make them do pretty much everything they can. I'm trying to make them dense rather than good at one thing. I'm trying to make them pretty good at a lot of things. My idea is that over the course of building a whole team of characters, all 4 characters, by taking the approach where I'm not just making them good at one thing, I create the largest density of overall power in the team. And the only trick is you have to make sure you're actually using all of the different benefits. But I think that's not that hard. You can have, for example, you could have a team that is made with, let's say, Bennett, Diona, Ningguang, and, I don't know, Tartaglia. And in this team, you're boosting Tartaglia's damage as much as you can. So how can you boost damage? Well, with attack buffs and damage percent buffs and crit, which I guess we don't have, and elemental mastery for the vaporize. And I have my Bennett not built just to maximize attack, but to also give the instructor's bonus, because he gets so many stats anyway, you're not losing much. He'll still do good damage, and to do some good damage, because why not? He can melt the Diona cryo activations. And I have Diona built pretty much all for HP, but with Maiden Beloved, so the heal is still good, and then you still have good shields because I'm building all for HP, and there's only one multiplier for that, so having more for it is kind of better and kind of worse in the sense that you're maximizing that thing, but then you lose a little bit of healing, but you have 2 multipliers for the heal, so it's fine. And then you get the elemental mastery buff off of her C6, and then that's multiple things she can do well. And she has the Favonius Warbow, so she can make particles. And then Ningguang has not just a bunch of burst damage for support, or to have another source of burst damage, since it's a bursty team, but also Prototype Amber to heal a little bit and get some additional value rather than needing to stay in one place all the time, just in case that's a problem. And also Archaic Petra to give a damage percent boost so that you can get that multiplier there. And you could say, okay, well, but if you just build your Ningguang for a lot of damage, won't you just do more damage than building for Archaic Petra, which is buffing damage, but you could just get the damage? You don't have to go through the hoops of buffing the damage. And the answer is, I actually think you probably do get more damage that way, but I don't know is the answer. I don't know if that gives you more damage. My intuition is that getting the most overall value is better. And taking a mindset to a character where you say, this is what I want to do. I want to make this character do the most damage. Rather than thinking that way, the big way that I like to think is, well, what does this character want to do? What was this designed to do? Does this character benefit from going all in on a bunch of damage? Or are there simply no artifacts with which to do that? When you make a weapon in Warframe, the game kind of says to you, well, there are pretty much only damage mods for the weapons. So apparently you're going to go all damage because there's no other benefit to compete. And so you go for all damage, and, or, some healing, I guess, sure. But you get the point, And what I find interesting is the degree to which that mindset I just described to you, it results in me being more or less apparently biased. Now, what's true is I'm just biased for a different thing. But that does lean in the direction of not just building a character for like all of one thing or a bunch of different things. It leans in the direction of appearing to be going for what the character is unique for or good for or something, or what I think people find interesting. But what's true is that I'm just doing the mindset that I find the most fun, and I think it's been consistent and has resulted in people getting the most inspired to try their own things, not necessarily the mindset that I have mathed out and determined to be optimal, or the one I like the most necessarily, although I do find all of them interesting, and so this is a way to get all of them. So this discussion about trees and branches sort of turned into that. To me, I feel like there's something to be said for this idea of building for the trees that are there, in a way. But I think it's tricky because for a lot of games, like when we've been playing Pyre, there are characters where you look at their trees and they're both good and everything, but one of them, if you take this mindset I'm describing, one of them is unique. It really gives that character some unique flavor. Hedwyn, for example, has a tree that makes him more selfish and improves his personal skills, but his other tree gives his whole team buffs while he's on the team, and he's pretty much the character that does that. So if you look at it from this perspective I described, you would then choose that tree because that's like the tree that's there, the unique tree to him, the tree you can only grow, I guess, if you play Hedwyn, right? And in Genshin Impact, for example, there are characters where you could make a character like Tartaglia do a bunch of different things, a bunch of utility stuff, but he does benefit from you being selfish with him. So maybe you should. Whereas you have characters like Bennett where, well, you're inherently already giving the team a huge buff. So the idea of buffing the team is pretty on the table. So any benefits to Bennett or to the rest of the team or both could be useful potentially. And you just have to decide. But to me, because not every character is interested in buffing their allies, you want to take that where it is. So I don't know. This is a weird way to answer your question. This is how I think about that concept in games. And I think maybe many people will see this mindset, which I could probably explain better if I had more time. I would have written a shorter letter about how I think about making a build in a game and why I think certain builds are interesting or not to show to other people or play or whatever, and why I might do something that certain way, because it feels like it's squandering I want to get everything I can out of the game or have the game do as many things as possible at the same time or something like that. Maybe that's a different way to explain it. I don't know. I've waffled on long enough. A very interesting discussion where I managed to avoid saying those two words that shall not be named for almost the entire video. I guess I said them at the beginning, didn't I? Did I slip up anywhere and say them? I don't know. I'm sure people will let me know.